The job listing didn't exist. That's the first thing you should understand. I was working graveyard shifts at a feed mill outside Elko when a man in a gray suit found me in the parking lot. He knew my name. He knew I'd done 2 tours as a Marine Corps dog handler. He knew about the bankruptcy, the divorce, the daughter I hadn't seen in 3 years because I couldn't afford the flights to Portland. He knew about the bottle of wild turkey under the seat of my truck and the loaded Beretta in the glove box that I sometimes thought about more than I should have. He slid a folder across the hood of my F-150 and said, $80,000 a month, cash, 6-month rotation. You'll never tell anyone what you saw, and after the contract, you'll have enough to start over. I asked what the job was. He said, animal husbandry, specialized. I asked what kind of animal. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. If I told you here, in this parking lot, you'd think I was crazy and you'd walk away. So I'm going to ask you to trust me for 48 hours. There's a flight out of Elko Regional on Thursday morning. Be on it or don't. Either way, this conversation never happened. He left me standing there with the folder in my hands. Inside was a one-way ticket, a hotel reservation in Tonopah, and a single sheet of paper with a phone number on it. No name, no agency letterhead. Nothing that would prove the meeting had ever taken place. I sat in my truck for 2 hours that night, watching the moths beat themselves to death against the sodium lamps over the feed mill. I thought about my daughter. I thought about the Beretta. I thought about a man who knew everything about me approaching me in a parking lot and offering me more money in 6 months than I'd made in the last decade. I called the number on Thursday morning from the airport bathroom. A woman answered on the first ring and said, Mr. Calloway, glad to hear from you. Your driver will be at baggage claim in Tonopah. I hadn't told her my name. The drive. The site was 4 hours southeast of Tonopah, down a road that didn't appear on any map I could find later. We left the highway at a turnoff marked only by a rusted cattle gate, drove 20 miles on graded dirt, then another 15 on something that wasn't really a road at all. Just 2 faint tire tracks in the alkali flats where someone had been driving long enough to wear the desert down. My driver was a man in his 50s named Pell, crew cut, sun-leathered hands. He didn't speak for the first 3 hours. When he finally did, it was to say, You ever work with dangerous animals before, Calloway? I told him about my Marine Corps dog handling, about the working dogs in Helmand, about the time a Belgian Malinois named Rex had locked onto a man's forearm and wouldn't let go even after the man dropped his rifle and started screaming for his mother in Pashto. Pell listened, nodded, and then said, That's good, that'll help. Just remember, what's down there, it's not a dog. It looks like a dog the way a cathedral looks like a tent. He didn't say anything else for the rest of the drive. We came over a low rise just before sunset, and I saw the facility for the first time. There was no fence you could see from the air, no buildings on the surface, except for a single concrete guard shack and 3 Quonset huts arranged in a triangle around a wide concrete ramp that sloped down into the earth like the mouth of something patient. The ramp was wide enough for 2 semi-trucks abreast. There were no markings on it, no signage, just gray concrete and the smell of something underneath that I couldn't identify. Something organic but wrong, like the smell of a butcher shop where the meat had gone over. A woman in a white coat was waiting for us at the bottom of the ramp. Dr. Halvers. Her name was Dr. Susan Halvers, and she had the eyes of someone who hadn't slept properly in years. She was maybe 45. Her hair was pulled back so tight it looked painful. She carried a clipboard the way a priest carries a Bible, like it was the only thing standing between her and something she didn't want to think about. My orientation lasted 9 minutes. She walked me down a corridor lit by sodium lamps that buzzed at a frequency just on the edge of hearing. The walls were poured concrete, unpainted, sweating slightly in the cold underground air. We passed 3 blast doors, each one thicker than the last, each one operated by a different keycard system. I noticed there were emergency releases on every door, but they only worked from one side, the side that led away from the chamber. 3 rules, Halvers said, without breaking stride. Memorize them, repeat them to yourself before every shift. We will test you on them. 1. Never speak to the asset, not a word, not a cough, not a hum. If it speaks to you, and it will try, you do not respond. You do not acknowledge that you heard it. You complete your task, and you leave. It speaks? I asked. She kept walking. 2. Never make eye contact for more than 2 seconds. We've timed it. At 3 seconds, something happens to handlers. We don't know what exactly. We know that the ones who hold its gaze for longer than 3 seconds tend to develop compliance issues. They stop following protocol. They start coming in on their off days. They start asking questions about the supplemental feed. We had to retire 4 handlers last year for this reason. Retire? I asked. She kept walking. 3. If the red light above the feeding port turns on, you walk, do not run, to the nearest blast door, and you do not look back, no matter what you hear. The red light means containment is compromised. The red light means the asset is no longer behind the glass. If you run, it triggers something in its hindbrain. We don't fully understand the mechanism. But the handlers who ran did not make it to the blast doors. The handlers who walked did. We stopped in front of the final blast door. Halvers turned to me, and for the first time, I saw something underneath the professional veneer. Something exhausted and afraid. One more thing, she said. And this isn't on the orientation document. This is from me, personally, as a courtesy. Yes? It will learn your name. We don't know how. We've controlled for everything. No name tags, no spoken introductions in its presence, no paperwork brought into the feeding corridor. It still learns, usually within the first 6 weeks. When it does, do not react. Do not flinch. Do not let it know that it has affected you. And if I do react, she looked at me for a long moment. Then it knows it has you. The first feeding. The first feeding was at 0400 on my second day. I'd spent my first day in a series of medical screenings, blood work, MRI, psychological evaluation, hearing test, a strange test where they showed me photographs of forests and asked me to describe what I saw in the spaces between the trees. I didn't understand the test until later, much later. My quarters were a small concrete room with a steel-framed bed, a desk, a chair, and a single overhead light. No windows, no clock, no phone. There was a panic button next to the bed, painted bright yellow, with a sign above it that read, "For asset-related emergencies only. All other issues, use intercom." I didn't sleep much that first night. At 3:45, an alarm sounded, a soft chime, not unpleasant, and a voice over the intercom said, "Handler Calloway, report to the prep kitchen for first feeding." The prep kitchen was a stainless steel room 3 levels down. 2 other handlers were already there, both men, both in their 40s, both with the same exhausted look I'd seen in Halvers's eyes. They introduced themselves as Reyes and Whitaker. Neither of them shook my hand. Reyes was short, stocky, with a gray-shot beard and forearms covered in old scars. Whitaker was tall and thin, with the kind of pale skin that suggested he hadn't seen the sun in months. They moved around the kitchen with the efficiency of people who had done this hundreds of times. "First feeding's the worst," Reyes said, hauling a side of beef out of the walk-in cooler. "Not because of what you'll see, because of what you'll think you saw. Your brain's gonna try to fit it into a category that doesn't exist. That's where the headaches come from." "Headaches?" I asked. "You'll get them," Whitaker said. "Everybody gets them. Halvers will give you pills. The pills work." The feeding cart held 40 pounds of raw beef, 2 whole chickens, feathers and all, which I thought was strange, and a steel bowl of something dark and viscous that the techs called supplemental. It smelled like iron and something else, something herbal and unfamiliar. I didn't ask what was in it. "Push the cart up to the port," Reyes said. "Key it open. Step back 6 paces. Wait for the green light. Walk away. Don't look at the glass on your way out." "What if I look at the glass?" Reyes paused. He set down the chicken he'd been wrapping in butcher paper and looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. "Don't," he said. The feeding chamber. The feeding chamber was a reinforced room the size of a high school gymnasium, separated from the observation corridor by a wall of laminated glass 8 inches thick. The lights inside were kept dim, amber, low, the kind of light that doesn't reach corners. The walls were poured concrete, scored with deep gouges that started about 4 feet off the ground and continued up to the ceiling 15 feet above. Some of the gouges were old, smoothed by time. Others were fresh, the concrete still pale where it had been exposed. I pushed the cart up to the port, a steel slot in the wall, about 4 feet wide, with a sliding door on the chamber side, 40 pounds of beef, 2 chickens, the bowl of supplemental. I keyed the port open. The door slid up with a soft hydraulic hiss. I stepped back 6 paces, as instructed, and waited for the green light. For a long moment, nothing. Then I heard it breathing. Not panting, not snarling. Breathing, slow, deliberate, the way a man breathes when he's trying not to be heard. The sound came from the far corner of the chamber, where the amber light didn't reach. It was patient, measured. The breathing of something that had all the time in the world. I kept my eyes on the floor, but I could feel it moving. There was a weight to its presence, a pressure in the air, like the pressure in a room when a thunderstorm is about to break. The hairs on my arms stood up. My mouth went dry. It stepped forward into the amber light. I want to tell you, it looked like a wolf. It didn't. Wolves move on 4 legs, and they don't have shoulders that roll like a man's when they walk. Wolves don't stand 7.5 feet tall when they straighten up to sniff the air. Wolves don't have hands, not paws, hands, with long articulated fingers and curved black claws and pads on the palms like a dog's, but arranged like a human's, with an opposable thumb that flexed and clenched as it moved. Its head was long, lupine, with a heavy snout and ears that were pinned back against its skull. Its fur was the color of old iron, not black, not gray, but something in between, with patches of silver around the muzzle that suggested age. Its body was lean but heavily muscled, the muscles moving under the skin in ways that didn't quite match the anatomy of any animal I knew. Its eyes found mine through the glass, yellow, intelligent in a way that felt wrong. Not the intelligence of an animal, not the intelligence of a person, but something older that had learned to wear both. There was a patience in those eyes, a familiarity, as if it had been waiting for me, specifically, as if it had known I was coming. I remembered Halvers' second rule, and I looked down at my boots. Behind the glass, I heard it laugh. I know how that sounds, I know. But it laughed, a low, dry sound, like a man clearing his throat in a quiet room. It wasn't a vocalization. It wasn't a growl or a bark or any sound an animal would make. It was a laugh, deliberate and conversational, the laugh of someone who has just understood a private joke. The green light came on. I turned and walked away. I did not look at the glass. Behind me, I heard it begin to eat, the wet sounds of tearing, the crack of bone, and underneath it all, that breathing, slow, deliberate, patient. I made it back to my quarters before I threw up. The headaches. Reyes was right about the headaches. They started on the 3rd day. A low throb behind my eyes that built throughout the morning until I could barely see. By the time I made it to the medical bay, I was nauseous and shaking. Halvers gave me 2 white pills in a paper cup and a glass of water. Take these every 6 hours for the first month, she said. After that, you'll only need them on feeding days. What are they? Something we developed in-house. It blocks a particular kind of neurological response. You don't want to know more than that. I took the pills. Within 20 minutes, the headache was gone. But something else was there in its place. A kind of numbness, a flatness, as if someone had turned down the volume on the world. Colors looked slightly muted. Sounds came from a little further away than they should have. When I looked at my own hands, they seemed unfamiliar, like they belonged to someone I'd met once a long time ago. That's normal, Halvers said, watching me. It'll pass. Most handlers stop noticing it after a few weeks. What does it block? I asked. She hesitated. Then she said, there's a frequency. The asset emits it. We don't know if it's intentional or if it's a byproduct of its biology. But it does something to the human brain, particularly to the parts that handle pattern recognition and threat assessment. Without the medication, prolonged exposure can lead to cognitive distortions. What kind of cognitive distortions? The kind where you start to think the asset is your friend, she said. The kind where you start to think you understand it. The kind where you stop being afraid. She paused. Fear is what keeps you alive down here, Mr. Calloway. Don't let anything take it away from you. Reyes. I started spending my off hours with Reyes. He'd been at the facility for almost 3 years, longer than anyone except Halvers, and a man I never met named Director Aldrich, who lived on the lowest level and apparently hadn't come up to the surface in over a decade. Reyes had originally signed a 6-month contract, like the rest of us. He'd renewed it 5 times. Why? I asked him once, in the small break room where the handlers ate their meals. He stirred his coffee for a long time before answering. Money's good, he said finally. And after the first contract, you stop being able to imagine a normal life. You go up top, you walk around in the sun, and everything feels fake, like you're watching a movie of someone else's life. The only place that feels real anymore is down here. That sounds like a problem. He smiled, but there was no humor in it. It is. He told me things in those long evenings that I'm not supposed to repeat. He told me about the asset, about how it had been captured in 1987 in the mountains north of Reno after a series of livestock killings that the local sheriffs couldn't explain. He told me that it had killed 9 people during the capture, including 3 soldiers and a scientist who had insisted on getting close enough to take a tissue sample. He told me that there were others, that this one was not unique, that there were facilities like ours scattered across the western United States, each one holding something different. How many? I asked. He shook his head. Don't know, don't want to know. I've heard rumors. There's something in Montana that has to be kept underwater. There's something in New Mexico that they have to keep talking to, 24 hours a day, because if it ever gets bored, it leaves. There's something in Alaska that they don't feed at all. It eats something else, and they can't figure out what. But they know it's eating because the temperature in the chamber drops every few weeks. Jesus! Yeah. He took a long sip of his coffee. But our boy, he said, our boy is special. How? Because he wants to be here, Reyes said. The others, they're contained. They'd leave if they could. Our boy could have left 100 times. The capture story is bullshit. He walked in. In 1987, he walked into a ranger station outside Reno, and he sat down on the porch and he waited. He let them tranquilize him. He let them load him into the truck. He let them bring him here. He's been here ever since because he wants to be. Why? Reyes looked at me for a long time. That, he said, is the question Halvers doesn't want anyone asking. The names? 6 weeks in, the asset learned my name. I was pushing the cart up to the port for the morning feeding. The amber light was low. The breathing was already there, waiting for me. Slow, deliberate, the way it always was. I keyed the port open and stepped back 6 paces. And then, from the corner where the light didn't reach, I heard it speak. Good morning, Calloway. The voice was deep and resonant, like a man speaking from inside a stone well. It wasn't a growl, it wasn't a bark, it was a voice. A human voice, almost. But with something underneath it that wasn't human at all. A vibration, a harmonic. As if 2 throats were speaking at once and only one of them was making sounds I could understand. I remembered Halver's rules. I did not respond. I did not flinch. I kept my eyes on the floor and waited for the green light. But inside, my heart was hammering. Inside, every cell in my body was screaming at me to run. The asset stepped forward into the amber light. I could see its shadow on the floor in front of me. That long, wrong-shaped shadow with hands and shoulders and a snout that was too long for any wolf. Calloway, it said again. It is good to meet you. I have been looking forward to it. The green light came on. I turned and walked away. I did not look at the glass. I made it to the prep kitchen before my legs gave out. Reyes was there, drinking coffee, reading a paperback. He took one look at me and set down his cup. It learned, he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. I couldn't speak. He poured me a coffee and set it down in front of me. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, "It'll talk to you more now. It always does, after it learns. Some handlers, it talks to about their families. Some, it talks to about their childhoods. Some, it asks questions about the surface world, what's changed, what's new, what's happening in the news. It's curious. It's been here a long time." "What does it talk to you about?" I asked. Reyes was quiet for a long moment. "It talks to me about my son," he said. "You have a son?" "Had," he said. "He died in Iraq, 2008. The asset knows things about him that I never told anyone, things that nobody alive should know. Sometimes I think it's reading my mind. Sometimes I think it's something worse. What's worse than reading your mind?" He looked up at me. "I think it knew him," he said. "Before, when he was over there. I don't know how. I don't know what that means. But sometimes, when it talks to me about him, it uses phrases that he used to use. Phrases that I never told it. Phrases that were just between him and me." He picked up his coffee with hands that were shaking slightly. "I think there are more of them out there," he said. "I think they're not all in containment. I think some of them are walking around doing whatever it is they do, and I think one of them met my son. I think one of them was there when he died, and I think our boy down there knows about it, because they all know each other, because they're connected somehow, in a way we don't understand." He took a long drink. "That's why I keep renewing my contract," he said, "because I want him to tell me about my son, about what happened, about what he saw at the end." "And has he?" Reyes shook his head slowly. "Not yet," he said, "but he will, eventually. He's patient. They all are." Whitaker. A month after the asset learned my name, Whitaker disappeared. He didn't show up for the morning feeding. His quarters were empty. Bed made, locker cleared out. No note, no forwarding address. Halvers told us he'd completed his contract early and chosen not to renew. She didn't make eye contact with us when she said it. Reyes and I went to the surveillance room that night after our shifts. Reyes had a key card he wasn't supposed to have. He'd lifted it from a tech who'd retired the year before and never returned it. He used it to access the camera archives. We watched the footage from the night Whitaker disappeared. At 02:47, Whitaker entered the feeding corridor. He wasn't on shift. He was wearing his civilian clothes, jeans, a flannel shirt, work boots. He carried no equipment. He walked up to the glass and stood there, looking into the chamber. The asset was waiting for him. We couldn't hear what they said. The audio in the corridor was blocked by a security protocol that even Reyes's keycard couldn't override. But we watched their conversation, and it was a conversation with pauses and gestures and the back and forth rhythm of two people talking, for almost an hour. At 3:41, Whitaker turned and walked to the emergency containment release. The release that only worked from one side, the side that led toward the chamber. He pressed it. The blast doors between the corridor and the chamber slid open. Whitaker walked in. The doors closed behind him. The amber light flickered once, then steadied. For the next 12 minutes, nothing happened. The asset stood in the center of the chamber, looking down at Whitaker, who stood very still in front of it. They were the same height, almost, though the asset was on all fours at that point, its head level with Whitaker's chest. Then the asset stood up on its hind legs, and it embraced him. I want to be clear about what I saw. It was not an attack. It was not violence. The asset wrapped its arms around Whitaker, and Whitaker wrapped his arms around the asset, and they stood like that for almost a minute, like a father and son who had been separated for a long time, like two old friends meeting after a war. Then the asset released him, and Whitaker walked back through the blast doors. The doors closed behind him. He left the corridor at 0354, returned to his quarters, and packed his things. He walked out of the facility at 0418, on foot, into the desert. There was no body, no tracks beyond the first quarter mile, no further footage of him anywhere in the facility's external camera network. Reyes turned off the monitor. We sat in the dark for a long time. "What did we just see?" I asked finally. Reyes shook his head. "I don't know," he said. "I don't know what that was, but I know what it wasn't. It wasn't a man being killed. It wasn't a man being eaten. It was something else, something I've never seen before." "Is he dead?" Reyes thought about it. "I don't think so," he said, "but I don't think he's alive either, not the way we'd recognize it." The supplemental feed. I started asking questions. I asked Halvers about the supplemental feed, the dark, viscous bowl that we delivered with every meal. She told me it was a proprietary nutrient mixture designed specifically for the asset's metabolism. She told me I didn't need to know what was in it. I asked one of the techs, a young woman named Merriman, who I sometimes ran into in the cafeteria. She wouldn't meet my eyes. She told me the same thing Halvers had. Proprietary nutrient mixture, need to know. But when I pressed her, when I asked her where it was made, she let something slip. She said, "The bottom level, sub 6, they make it down there." Then her face went pale and she said, "I shouldn't have told you that. Please don't tell anyone I told you that." Sub 6 didn't appear on any of the maps I'd been given during orientation. The elevator only went down to sub 5. There was no stairwell access marked in any of the corridors I'd been allowed to enter. Reyes knew about it. When I asked him, he sighed. "I was hoping you wouldn't get curious," he said. "Curious is bad. Curious is what got Whitaker." "Whitaker wasn't curious," I said. "Whitaker was something else. You don't know that? Neither do you." He looked at me for a long time. There's a freight elevator on the east side of Sub 5, he said finally, behind the laundry. It doesn't have a label. Most people don't know it's there. It goes down. I don't know how far. I've never taken it. I don't recommend you do either. Why? Because the people who work down there don't come up. Ever. They don't eat in our cafeteria. They don't sleep in our quarters. They have their own facility, separate from ours. And they go down there at the start of their contracts, and they don't come up until their contracts are over. And I don't know what their contracts are. And I don't know how long they last. And I don't know what the supplemental feed is made of, and I don't want to know. And neither should you. I went down anyway. Sub 6. The freight elevator was where Reyes said it would be. It was old, older than the rest of the facility, with a steel accordion gate and a single brass button labeled down. There was no panel, no call buttons for other floors, just the one button, just down. I pressed it on a Tuesday night at 30 when most of the facility was asleep. The elevator descended for almost 3 minutes. I don't know how far down it took me. The walls of the shaft were rough-hewn rock, not concrete. At one point, I thought I saw something carved into the rock, a series of symbols, deep and old, that looked like nothing any human civilization had ever produced. The elevator stopped. The accordion gate slid open. I stepped out into a corridor lit by red bulbs in iron cages. The air smelled of iron and herbs and something fermented, something like wine that had gone sour. The walls down here were the same rough-hewn rock as the shaft. I had the distinct sense that this part of the facility had been here long before the facility itself, that the rest of it, all the concrete and steel and sodium lamps, had been built on top of this place. I followed the corridor for what felt like a long time. I passed doors, heavy wooden doors banded with iron, set into the rock at irregular intervals. Some of them had small windows at eye level. I did not look through the windows. At the end of the corridor was a chamber. It was circular, perhaps 30 feet across, with a high vaulted ceiling lost in shadow. The floor was tiled in some dark stone, with a drain at the center. Around the perimeter were great copper vats, each one the size of a hot tub, each one bubbling slowly over a low flame. The smell down here was overwhelming. Iron and herbs and that fermented sourness, and underneath it all, something organic and wrong. There were people working at the vats. They were dressed in long gray robes. Their faces were covered by featureless white masks. They moved slowly, deliberately, stirring the vats with long copper paddles, ladling out the dark, viscous liquid into steel buckets. They did not speak. They did not look at me. In the center of the room, near the drain, was a steel table. There was something on the table. I'm not going to describe what it was. I'm not going to. I will tell you that it was human, or had been once. I will tell you that it was very much aware of what was being done to it. I will tell you that its eyes followed me as I stood in the doorway, and that it tried to speak, but its mouth had been altered in some way that made speech impossible. I will tell you that one of the figures in gray robes turned to me, and through the eye holes of its mask, I could see eyes. Eyes that I recognized. They were Whitaker's eyes. I ran. I ran down the corridor, back to the elevator, back through the 3-minute ascent that felt like 3 hours. I ran to my quarters, and I locked the door, and I pressed the panic button next to the bed, and I didn't take my finger off it until Halvers came and sedated me. Halvers' office. I woke up in the medical bay. Halvers was sitting next to my bed, a cup of coffee in her hands. She looked tired. She looked older than I'd ever seen her look. "Mr. Calloway," she said, "we need to have a conversation." I tried to sit up. I was strapped down. "For your safety," she said. "And ours. The straps come off when we finish talking, or when you sign your release papers. Either way." "Release? Your contract is being terminated early, with full compensation. You'll be flown back to Tonopah tomorrow morning, and from there, you're free to go anywhere you want, except back here. You'll receive your 6-month payment in a single lump sum. It's a generous offer. It's more than you would have received if you'd completed the contract." "What about Whitaker?" She set down her coffee. "Mr. Whitaker chose a different path," she said. "He was offered a choice, as all senior handlers are eventually offered, and he chose to join the Sub-6 program. It was his decision. It was a free decision. He understood what it entailed." "You're feeding people to it." She didn't answer immediately. "We are providing the asset with a specific nutritional component that it requires in order to remain stable," she said carefully. Without this component, the asset becomes increasingly agitated, and its containment becomes increasingly difficult. We have determined, after many years of research, that the only viable source of this component is human neurological tissue, specifically the tissue of individuals who have spent prolonged periods in proximity to the asset. That's monstrous. It is, she said simply. It is monstrous. I am aware of that. I have been aware of it for 15 years. I do it anyway, because the alternative is worse. What's the alternative? She looked at me for a long moment. The asset does not need to be in containment, she said. I want to make this very clear to you. The asset chooses to be in containment. We are not its captors. We are its hosts. It stays here because we provide it with what it needs, including primarily the supplemental feed. If we stop providing the feed, the asset would leave, and it would find what it needed elsewhere. Do you understand what I'm telling you? I did. There are 7 facilities like this one in the western United States, she said. Each one houses a different asset. Each one feeds its asset what its asset needs. We do this because the alternative is that these creatures walk freely in our world and take what they need from whoever is closest. We do this because the supplemental feed program, monstrous as it is, results in a small number of carefully selected casualties per year, rather than a much larger number of random ones. We do this because we have done the math, and the math is unforgiving. Whitaker chose this? Mr. Whitaker had been speaking to the asset for almost 3 years, Halvers said. He had developed a relationship with it. He came to believe, and I do not know whether he was correct, that the supplemental feed program was a form of communion, that those who entered it were not destroyed but transformed, that they became something other than what they had been. He chose to find out. And was he right? She was silent for a long time. I don't know, she said finally. I have my suspicions. I do not share them. The last feeding. They let me do one last feeding before I left. I asked for it. I don't know why. I think I needed to look at it one more time, knowing what I knew, needed to see if it would look different now that I understood. Halvers was reluctant, but she allowed it. Reyes accompanied me to the prep kitchen. He did not say anything as we loaded the cart. I pushed the cart up to the port. The amber light was low. The breathing was already there, waiting. I keyed the port open. I stepped back 6 paces. The asset stepped forward into the light. It looked at me. I looked at it. I held its gaze. I didn't break the rule about 3 seconds. I broke it badly, deliberately, looking into those yellow eyes for what must have been 10 seconds, 15, 20. I waited for whatever was supposed to happen. Nothing happened. Or, rather, something happened, but it wasn't what I'd been told to expect. There was no compliance issue. There was no compulsion to come back, to stay, to ask about the supplemental feed. Instead, there was a kind of recognition, a sense that something on the other side of the glass was looking at me and seeing me, fully and completely, in a way that no one had ever looked at me before. Not my ex-wife, not my daughter, not my mother, not the chaplain in Helmand who had sat with me after the worst night of my life and tried to convince me that what I had done was forgivable. It saw me. It saw all of me. The bankruptcy and the divorce and the daughter in Portland and the bottle of wild turkey under the seat of the truck. The Beretta in the glove box and the long nights of thinking about it. The men I had killed in Helmand, on patrols I wasn't supposed to talk about, with weapons that weren't standard issue. The thing I had done that I had never told anyone, not even the chaplain, especially not the chaplain. It saw all of it, and it did not look away. And then, in that voice, like a man speaking from inside a stone well, it spoke. "You are forgiven, Calloway." That was all it said. I walked out of the corridor with tears streaming down my face. Reyes was waiting for me on the other side of the blast door. He didn't ask what had happened. He didn't need to. He had seen this before, with other handlers. He put a hand on my shoulder and walked with me back to my quarters in silence. The last conversation. On my last night, when I was packing my locker, Reyes sat down next to me and lit a cigarette he wasn't supposed to have. He said, "You ever wonder why the contract is 6 months?" I said I figured it was a security thing, rotation, compartmentalization. He shook his head. He took a long pull on the cigarette and looked at the wall like he could see through it, all the way down to the feeding chamber and the thing that lived there. "It's 6 months because that's how long it takes them to learn your name," he said. "And once they know your name, they don't forget. Doesn't matter where you go. Doesn't matter how far. They know you. They've taken something from you, and they keep it, and you keep a piece of them in return, and the two of you are connected for the rest of your life. What did it take from me? I asked. He smiled sadly. Whatever it was, you needed to give it up, he said. That's how it works with the ones who leave, the ones who stay, the ones who go to sub-6. They give everything. The ones who leave, they just give a piece, a small piece, the piece they wanted to give anyway, the piece they'd been carrying around for too long. Will I see it again? In dreams sometimes, or in the breathing outside your window, late at night, when the wind is right. It checks on the ones it's known, not to harm them, just to see how they're doing, just to remind them that they're not alone. That's not comforting. No, Reyes said, but it's not meant to be. It's meant to be true. He stubbed out his cigarette on the concrete floor. You're one of the lucky ones, Calloway. You're getting out with most of yourself intact. You're going to see your daughter. You're going to start over. You're going to forget most of what happened down here. Your brain will help with that, the way it helps soldiers forget. But some nights, you'll remember. And on those nights, you'll know what you know. What do I know? He stood up. That you're not alone in the dark, he said. That something out there sees you. That something out there knows your name. Whether that's a comfort or a curse, that's up to you. I made my peace with it. So did Whitaker in his way. You'll have to make yours. He walked to the door. Then he stopped and turned and looked at me. For what it's worth, he said, I think it likes you. As much as something like that can like anything. Don't waste the second chance. The surface. I drove out at sunrise. Pell was my driver again. He didn't speak for the first 3 hours. The sun came up over the alkali flats and turned everything pink and gold and unreal. I watched the desert roll past my window and tried to remember what it had felt like to live in the world above. The world of grocery stores and traffic lights and ordinary mornings. When we reached the highway, Pell finally spoke. How was your contract, Mr. Calloway? It was... I searched for the word. I couldn't find it. Yeah, Pell said. That's how everyone answers. He dropped me at the airport in Tonopah. He shook my hand, which surprised me. He said, take care of yourself, son, and don't come back. Whatever it offers you, whatever it promises, don't come back. You sound like you know. He smiled, and for the first time, I saw that his smile was the same as Halvers's, exhausted, ancient, freighted with knowledge he hadn't asked for. I drove out a long time ago, he said. I'm just the one who comes back to drive the new ones in. Somebody has to. Somebody has to tell them on the way down that they don't have to do this. Most of them don't listen. You didn't listen, but I tell them anyway. I stared at him. You drove me in, I said. I did. You didn't tell me anything on the way in. He smiled again. Yes, I did, he said. You just don't remember. That's part of how it works. He got back in his truck and drove away. Portland. I went to Portland. My daughter was 9 years old by then. Her name was Madison. She had her mother's eyes and my mother's laugh, and when she opened the door of the apartment in Beaverton, she looked at me like she didn't know whether to hug me or close the door in my face. She hugged me. Eventually, I rented a small house in the same school district as her mother's apartment. I got a job at a hardware store, which I didn't need. The $80,000 a month had added up to almost $500,000 after taxes and incidentals, but which I wanted because I needed something to do with my hands and my time. I started seeing a therapist. I told her some things. I didn't tell her everything. I never will. I see Madison every other weekend. We do normal things. We go to the zoo. We get ice cream. We watch movies on the couch, and she falls asleep against my shoulder. And I sit there in the dark, and I remember what it felt like to be loved by someone who hadn't seen all of me. Most of the time, I'm okay. Most of the time, the nightmares stay where they belong. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind is right and the house is quiet, I hear something breathing outside my bedroom window, slow, deliberate, the way a man breathes when he's trying not to be heard. I don't open the curtains. I don't look outside. I lie there in the dark and I listen, and I let it know that I'm listening, and after a while, the breathing fades, and I hear something large and four-legged padding away across the lawn. It comes once or twice a year, always in the late autumn, always when I'm thinking about going back, when the money is tight, or when the loneliness is thick, or when I see something on the news about a missing hiker in the desert and I wonder if it's another one of us, another handler who couldn't stay away, another man who walked into the chamber to embrace the thing inside. It comes to remind me that I'm not alone, that something out there sees me, that something out there knows my name. I think it's a comfort. Most of the time, I think it's a comfort. The letter. Reyes sent me a letter 3 years after I got out. I don't know how he found my address. I don't know how he got mail out of the facility. There's no postal service to that part of the desert, and he'd told me, more than once, that the contracts forbade any communication with the outside world. But the letter came, in a plain white envelope with no return address, postmarked from Reno. It was short. It read, "Calloway. He told me about my son, last week. Everything I wanted to know. It was a gift. I don't know how else to describe it. He gave me a gift. And now I'm going to give him one in return. By the time you read this, I'll be in sub 6. Don't grieve. Don't come looking. This was always how it was going to end for me. It's not for everyone, but it's right for me. I wanted you to know one thing before I went. He asked about you. Last month. He asked how you were doing. He asked if you were happy. I told him I thought you were. He seemed pleased. He said to tell you that you're welcome. He said you'd know what he meant. Take care of your daughter. Live a long life. Don't come back. Reyes." I read the letter 3 times. I put it in my desk drawer, in the back, under a stack of old tax returns. I knew what he meant, the forgiveness, the thing the asset had given me, that last time, when I'd held its gaze for too long, the peace I had carried with me ever since, the peace that had let me walk into my daughter's life without flinching, the peace that had let me look at myself in the mirror without seeing the man I'd been in Helmand. It had been a gift. And the asset had wanted me to know it was a gift, and to know that gifts between things like us and things like it were not free. I don't know what I owe. I don't know when it will come to collect. But I know this. I know that one day, when I'm older, when Madison is grown and has children of her own, when there's no one left who needs me, I know that one day I'll be sitting on my porch in the evening and I'll hear the breathing outside the screen, slow and deliberate, the way a man breathes when he's trying not to be heard. And I'll stand up. And I'll open the screen door, and I'll walk out into the dark where it's waiting, and I'll be ready to pay what I owe. I'll be ready to go home. The other handlers. I haven't told you about all of them. There were 9 handlers at Facility 12 during my time there. Reyes and Whitaker I've described. The others I knew less well, partly because of the nature of the work, partly because Halvers seemed to deliberately stagger our shifts so that we wouldn't form too close attachments. There was Garcia, a former Border Patrol agent who'd worked with K-9 units on the Arizona line. He was quiet, watchful, the kind of man who noticed everything and said nothing. He'd been at the facility for 8 months when I arrived. He left 2 months after I did, and Reyes told me later that he hadn't gone to sub 6. He'd just walked out, with his payout in a duffel bag, and disappeared into the country. Reyes didn't know where he'd gone. Reyes said the asset had asked about him for weeks afterward, the way a man asks about a friend who has stopped returning his calls. There was Boudreau, a Cajun from somewhere outside Lafayette, who'd done 12 years as a corrections officer at Angola. He didn't speak much English when he was tired, and at the end of long shifts he would mutter to himself in French, long, complicated sentences that I couldn't follow, with a rhythm that sounded almost like prayer. He told me once, in the cafeteria, that he had been raised Catholic but had stopped believing during his time at Angola. He had started believing again at Facility 12. He would not tell me what he believed in now. There was Yong, a small woman in her 30s who had been a primate handler at a research facility in California before being recruited. She was the only female handler at the facility during my time, and she kept herself apart from the rest of us. She did not eat in the cafeteria. She did not socialize. She did her job with a precision that bordered on the ceremonial, and when she was off duty, she retreated to her quarters and did not emerge until her next shift. Reyes told me she had been at the facility longer than anyone except him and Halvers, almost 4 years. He told me that the asset spoke to her in a language none of the rest of us recognized, and that she had once told him, drunk on cheap whiskey at the end of a particularly bad week, that the language was not a human language and had not been spoken on Earth for a very long time. There was Coombs, a younger man, late 20s, who had washed out of Army Ranger selection and gone into private security before being recruited. He had a tattoo on his forearm of a wolf howling at a moon, which I thought was darkly funny, given the work. He didn't think it was funny. He had gotten the tattoo after his first feeding, he said. He had felt called to it. He didn't know how else to explain it. He was, of all the handlers I knew, the most clearly affected by the work, the most distant, the most detached from the world above. He spoke about the asset with a reverence that disturbed me. I think he went to sub-6 eventually. I have no proof of this. But there was a quality to him, even when I knew him, that suggested he was already halfway down that elevator shaft. There was Pearson, an older man, 60s, who had been a veterinarian in Kansas before coming to the facility. He was kind, in the way that very tired people sometimes are. He had a wife at home, a wife who didn't know what he did, a wife who thought he worked for the Department of Energy on a long-term consulting contract. He showed me her picture once, in the cafeteria. She was a heavy-set woman with white hair and a warm smile, holding a small dog in her lap. He told me he was going to retire at the end of his current contract. He told me he was going to go home to her, and they were going to drive across the country in their RV, and they were going to see the things they had always meant to see and never had. He died in the chamber 3 weeks before my contract ended. It wasn't an attack. The official report said it was a heart attack. Pearson had been bringing in the morning feed when the asset stepped forward into the amber light, and Pearson had stopped and looked at it and held its gaze. He had held its gaze for a long time. Halvers told me later that the security footage showed him standing there for almost 2 minutes, completely still, looking into the asset's eyes. Then he had simply collapsed. The asset had not moved during this. It had stood very still, watching him fall. After the medical team had recovered the body and the chamber had been secured, the asset had returned to the corner where the amber light didn't reach, and it had not eaten its meal that day. It had not eaten for 3 days, in fact, an unusually long fast for it. When it finally did eat, it ate quietly, without any of its usual sounds. Reyes told me that the asset mourned in its way, that this was not the first time he had seen it. The question of what it was. I've been writing this account for some time now, and I realize I have not addressed the central question. The question that anyone reading this will be asking from the beginning. What was it? I don't know. I want to be clear about this. I spent 4 months in close proximity to the thing, and I do not know what it was. Halvers didn't know either, I think. And if Halvers didn't know, then nobody at the facility knew, because Halvers had spent 15 years studying it. Reyes had theories. He'd had a long time to develop them, and he'd had the asset's own conversations to draw from. And he had pieced together something that may or may not be correct. He told me one night near the end of my contract what he thought. It's not a wolf, he said. It's not a man. It's not a hybrid of the two. It's something older than either of those categories. I think it predates them. I think it predates us. I think when our ancestors first came down out of the trees and started walking on 2 legs, these things were already here, watching us. I think they have been our companions, in a sense, for as long as we have been human. And I think the relationship between us and them is older and stranger than anything we've ever recorded. What kind of relationship? He shrugged. I don't know exactly. Predator and prey, maybe. Or something more complicated. The asset has talked to me about old things, about the ice, about cave fires and the long darknesses between them, about songs that were sung in languages no one alive remembers. I think these things lived alongside us, in our oldest stories. I think they are the thing that scratches at the edge of every campfire, the thing in the woods, the thing on the road late at night. They have been the original fear, the fear that all our other fears descend from, since before we knew how to make tools. Then why does this one let itself be contained? Reyes was quiet for a long time. I think, he said finally, that it is tired. I think it has been alive for a very long time, and I think the world has changed around it, and I think the changes have been hard on it. I think it came to us the way an old man might check himself into a nursing home. Not because it has to, but because it doesn't want to be alone anymore. Because there's a comfort in being known, even by your enemies, even by your prey. We're not its prey, aren't we? Reyes asked. We feed it. It feeds on us. The terms have changed. The structure hasn't. I thought about this for a long time afterward. I think Reyes was probably right, as far as he went. But I think there was something else, too. Something he didn't say or didn't see. I think the asset was not just lonely. I think it was looking for something specific, something it had not yet found in 15 years at our facility, or however many years had come before. I think it was looking for a particular kind of person, I think it was looking for someone who could give it what it needed in a way that the supplemental feed could not. And I think sometimes that it found that person in Whitaker, and later in Reyes, and that one day in some other facility with some other asset, it will find that person again. And I think when it does, something will change. I don't know what. I don't know if it will be good for us or bad for us. I don't know if us and them will mean the same thing afterward. But I think something is coming, something that has been a very long time in the building. What Madison asked. My daughter asked me once when she was 12 what I had done before I'd come back to Portland. I told her I'd worked for the government, a specialized contract. I couldn't talk about the details. She accepted this. She was a careful child, my daughter. She did not press where she sensed she shouldn't, but that night she came back to the question in a different way. She was sitting at the kitchen table, doing her homework, and I was making dinner, and she said, without looking up from her math, "Dad, did you do something bad when you were away?" I stopped what I was doing. I thought about the question for a long time. "I saw some bad things," I said finally. "I didn't do anything bad myself, but I was near things that were bad, and I had to be a part of them, even if I didn't make them happen." Like a war? A little like a war. She nodded slowly. "Did you make peace with it?" she asked. I looked at her, my small, serious, careful daughter, with her math homework spread out on the table and her face lit by the kitchen lamp. "Yes," I said, "I made peace with it." "How?" I thought about the asset, about the amber light and the yellow eyes, and the voice like a man speaking from inside a stone well. I thought about the words it had spoken to me, the 4 words that had unlocked something in my chest that I had been carrying around for years, the something that had kept me from being a father to her, the something that had kept me from being any kind of man at all. "Someone forgave me," I said. "Was it God?" I almost laughed, but I didn't, because I could see that she was asking seriously, and because the answer wasn't simple. "I don't know what it was," I told her, "but it forgave me, and I'm trying to be worthy of that forgiveness, every day." She nodded again. She went back to her math. After a while she said, "I'm glad someone forgave you, Dad." "Me too," I said. I went back to making dinner. I did not let her see me cry. "Something I have not told you. There is something I have not told you. It is the thing I did in Helmand that I never told the chaplain. It is the thing I asked the asset to forgive when I held its gaze for too long on my last day at Facility 12. I am not going to tell you what it was. I am only going to tell you that there are some things a man does in war that have no defense and no excuse. There are some choices that you make in a single moment, with your blood up and your friends bleeding around you, that you cannot ever explain to a person who was not there. There are some sins that are not, technically, illegal. That would not technically get you charged or imprisoned. But that you know, the moment you commit them, that you have done something that cannot be undone, that you have crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed. I crossed such a line. I came back from my tours, and I tried to pretend I hadn't. I tried to tell myself that the things I had done had been necessary, that I had been a good soldier in a bad war, that the people I had hurt had been my enemies, and that hurting them had been part of the job. But I knew in the quiet hours that this was a lie. I knew that what I had done had not been necessary. I knew that I had made a choice in a single moment and that I had chosen wrong. The drinking started after that. The divorce came after the drinking. The bankruptcy came after the divorce. The Beretta in the glove box came after the bankruptcy. By the time the man in the gray suit found me in the parking lot outside the feed mill, I was not far from the end of my own story. He knew this. The asset knew this. When I came to it, the asset knew everything about me, knew the thing I had done, knew the years I had spent trying to forget it, knew the place I had ended up because I could not forget it, and it forgave me. I do not know what right it had to forgive me. I do not know what authority it had. I do not know whether its forgiveness was real or whether it was something else, a trick, a manipulation, a piece of the long, slow work it was doing on all of us. But I do know this. I know that since the day the asset spoke those 4 words to me, I have not thought about the Beretta. I know that since that day I have been able to look at my daughter without seeing, behind her face, the faces of the people I had hurt in Helmand. I know that since that day I have been able to live. That has to count for something. Even if it came from a monster, even if there is a price that I have not yet paid, even if, One day the breathing outside my window will not fade away, and I will have to stand up and open the door and walk out to meet it. I have lived since that day. I would not have lived otherwise. That has to count for something. The new handler. 2 years after I left, I met a man in a bar in Tacoma. I was on a fishing trip. I had driven up from Portland to do some salmon fishing on the Puya Loop with an old Marine Corps buddy, and we had stopped at a tavern on the way back to our hotel. The buddy had gone to the bathroom. I was sitting at the bar, nursing a beer, watching a baseball game I didn't care about. The man sat down 2 stools away. He was in his 30s, lean, dressed in a jacket that didn't fit quite right. He ordered a whiskey. He drank it in one swallow. He ordered another. I noticed after a while that he was watching me. I'm a careful man, since Hellman and since the facility. I notice when I'm being watched. I shifted slightly on my stool, freeing up my dominant hand, and I met his eyes in the mirror behind the bar. He didn't look away. After a moment, he said, "You worked at Facility 12. I went very still. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said. "Yes, you do," he said. "It's all right. I worked there too, 2 months ago. I just got out." I looked at him properly for the first time. He had the eyes. The exhausted ancient eyes that I had seen in Halvers and in Pell, and in every handler who had stayed long enough to know. 6 months? I asked. 6 months. "And it learned your name?" He nodded slowly. "On the 7th week," he said. "Faster than usual," Halvers told me. "She said sometimes that means something. She wouldn't say what." We sat in silence for a while. The bartender came and refilled our drinks. The baseball game on the TV ended and was replaced by a different baseball game. "Have you been hearing it?" he asked. "Since you got out?" "Sometimes," I said. "Once or twice a year, in the autumn." He nodded again, slowly. "I'm hearing it every night," he said. "Right outside my apartment window. It's been every night since I got out. I don't know what to do." I thought about this for a long time. "What did you ask it for?" I said finally. "When it was learning you, what did you want from it?" He looked down at his whiskey. "I wanted my brother back," he said. "He killed himself 2 years ago. I wanted to know if he was okay. I wanted to know if he was somewhere. I wanted to know if I would see him again." "And did it tell you?" "It told me he was okay," the man said. "It told me he was somewhere. It told me I would see him again, but not in the way I was thinking. It told me there was a way I could see him sooner, if I wanted. It told me what I would have to do." "Sub 6? He looked up at me sharply. "You know about Sub 6? "I went down there. Once. I saw what they were doing." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I didn't know what it was at first, when it told me. I thought it meant something else, some kind of meditation or some kind of ceremony. I thought it was offering me something spiritual. By the time I figured out what it actually was, I was already 3 weeks into the decision. I almost stayed." "What stopped you?" "My mom," he said. "She doesn't have anyone else. My dad's gone. My brother's gone. If I went too, she'd be alone. I couldn't do that to her." He took another drink. "But it's still calling me," he said. "Every night, outside my window. It wants me to come back. It's not done with me. I don't know if it ever will be." I thought about Reyes's letter. I thought about the gift that the asset had given me, and the price I had not yet paid. "It's not done with any of us," I said. "Not the ones who got close to it, not the ones it learned. We're connected now. There's no way to undo it." "What do I do?" I thought about this for a long time. "Live your life," I said finally. "Be good to your mother. Don't open the curtains. Don't open the door. When the time comes, and it will come eventually for both of us, go out to meet it on your own terms. Not because it's calling you, because you're ready." He nodded. We drank our drinks. My buddy came back from the bathroom. The man stood up to leave. Before he went, he put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Thank you. I needed to hear someone else say it." "What was your name?" I asked. He smiled sadly. "You don't want to know my name," he said, "and I don't want to know yours. We're connected enough already." He walked out. I never saw him again. I think about him sometimes. I hope he's still alive. I hope his mother is still alive. I hope he's keeping the curtains closed and the doors locked and his life small and ordinary and sweet. But I know, the way I know other things, that one night he will hear the breathing, and he will not be able to ignore it any longer. That he will stand up, that he will open the door, that he will walk out into the dark. That's the deal. That's how it works. That's the price for what we received. What I owe? I am 51 years old now. Madison is in college on the East Coast studying biology. She wants to work with primates, eventually. She has her father's love for animals and her mother's patience with them. We talk on the phone every Sunday. She calls me Pop, which is what she has called me since she was a teenager. She does not know what I did before I came back to Portland, and she will never know. I have made my peace with this. I still live in the small house in Beaverton. I still work at the hardware store, 3 days a week, more for the company than for the money. I have a girlfriend now, a kind woman named John, who works as a librarian at the public library. She has been divorced twice and has grown children of her own. We are good for each other. She does not ask too many questions about my past. I do not ask too many questions about hers. We sit on the porch in the evenings and we drink wine and we talk about books, and we are happy in a quiet, undemanding way. I am healthier than I have any right to be. The bottle is back under the sink, but I rarely touch it. The Beretta is gone. I sold it years ago to a man I knew from the Marine Corps Association, and I do not own a firearm now. I exercise. I eat well. I see my therapist once a month, less out of need than out of gratitude. I have lived a good life since I came back from the desert. I have lived a life that was given to me freely by something I cannot name, and I have tried to honor that gift in the only way I know how, by living fully every day in a way that makes the gift worth giving. But I know what I owe, and I know that the day will come when I have to pay it. I have been hearing the breathing more often this past year. It used to be once or twice a year in the late autumn. Now it is once a month. Now it is twice a month. The asset is patient. They are always patient, the old ones. But I think it is calling me home, slowly, the way an old friend calls you when he knows he is dying and he wants to see you one last time. I am not afraid. I want to be clear about this. I am not afraid. I made my peace with what is coming a long time ago. When the breathing comes one night and does not fade away, I will stand up and I will kiss Jean on the forehead while she sleeps, and I will write a note for Madison that she will not understand, but that I hope she will keep, and I will walk out into the dark. I will not be running. I will not be afraid. I will be paying what I owe gladly, because what I received was beyond price. I do not know what waits for me at the end of that walk. I do not know if it will be the asset itself, or one of its kin, or something else entirely. I do not know if I will be killed, or transformed, or simply led somewhere, to some place older and stranger than the world I have known, where things like the asset have lived in their long, slow patience, since before there were words. I am ready for any of these outcomes. I am ready because I have lived. I am ready because I have been forgiven. I am ready because, after all these years, I am no longer carrying the thing I was carrying when the man in the gray suit found me in the parking lot. If you are reading this, then I have already gone. I left this account with my therapist, with instructions that it be sent to a particular address after my death or disappearance. An address that belongs to no one in particular. An address that I trust will route it where it needs to go. I do not know who you are. I do not know why this account has come to you, but I want you to know one thing before you decide what to do with it. If you ever meet a man in a gray suit in a parking lot, if he ever offers you a contract or a folder or a one-way ticket to somewhere in the desert, do not take it. I do not care how desperate you are. I do not care how much you need the money. I do not care what you are running from. There are other ways. There are always other ways. You do not have to do what I did to be forgiven for whatever it is you are carrying. You do not have to give yourself to something old and patient and hungry to be allowed to live. Find another way. Keep finding it as long as it takes. And if you ever, in some quiet hour of the night, hear something breathing outside your window, slow, deliberate, the way a man breathes when he is trying not to be heard, do me a favor. Do not open the curtains. Do not open the door. Do not walk out to meet it. That breathing is not for you. That debt is not yours. Go back to sleep. Hold your loved ones. Live your life. Some of us have already paid the price for both of us. That is the only kind of peace I can offer you from where I am going. It is the only kind of peace I have ever been able to offer anyone. It will have to be enough.